I didn't like my place in the world. All I had was $30,000 in business from one client. My twins were 6 months old and $1,000 in the bank. Loved working for the SEC. It was about doing the right thing, protecting our country, trying to get to the truth, not trying to prosecute people for the sake of prosecuting. I used to think I understood empathy. When I had conflict, I would try and spend 30 seconds, 60 seconds really thinking through the other person's perspective. And what I realized later in life, that's not sufficient. We're best known for setting up private funds. We represent over 1,000 funds. We launch about 60 to 80 funds per year. You never know if you have good lawyering until things go bad. When everything's going well, how would you know?
This is The Litigator's Edge, the podcast where smart strategy, practical innovation, and real-world experience come together to move litigation forward. Each week, we sit down with attorneys, legal tech leaders, and trusted advisors who are rethinking how great legal work gets done. You'll hear how law firms are building a competitive advantage. These conversations are grounded, insightful, and designed to help you refine how you work and how you win. Here is your host, Aniket Sawant.
Hello, and welcome to today's episode of The Litigator's Edge, a podcast where innovative attorneys reveal the strategies that have transformed their legal practice. My name is Aniket Sawant, and I'm co-founder and CEO of Threadio. My guest today is a founding partner of Sadis Goldberg, where he oversees the firm's financial services group, advising hundreds of private funds. He began his career as an enforcement attorney with the SEC, is a regular expert commentator on channels like CNBC and Bloomberg, and is frequently quoted in the Wall Street Journal. It's my pleasure to welcome Ron Geffner to the podcast. Welcome, Ron, and thank you for being here.
Thanks so much for having me. It's a pleasure. It really is a pleasure to be here. You've got a very tremendous podcast.
I appreciate the kind words, Ron. So, as you know, Ron, I like to ask each guest who comes onto the podcast either a fun fact about themselves or a cringe joke. Which will it be, and what is it for you?
We're going to go with a fun fact. And as we discussed off air, many people comment on my sense of style. And in the last several years, in connection with my nesting and drawing strength and peace from where I live, I built and designed a home on the ocean. And in furtherance of my relationship with my significant other, we just gutted and redid another home. So that's something I enjoy. And people always lie to me and say kind things about the end results.
That's pretty cool. Based on your sartorial choices today and when we last met, I would agree with your design sense.
And if you know any place you can buy a lie detector machine, I'd love to have one in my house because then I'll just have people sit down and test it out.
Sounds good. I'll ask my tech friends here in San Francisco if they have one. Fantastic. Well, Ron, I always think of every attorney who makes the time to be on this podcast as a superhero, and every superhero has an origin story. And I know you have a good one. Can you please share that with us?
Sure. Depending on how far back you want me to go in the origin story. We'll start at the formation of Sadis Goldberg. So I was 30 years old when I joined two other gentlemen, really three, because somebody joined a couple months after I did, to create what is the Sadis Goldberg they now know. And at the time when I formed the firm, I didn't like my place in the world. All I had was $30,000 in business from one client. My twins at the time, who are now 29, were 6 months old, and their mother was home with the children, working at home, but not getting paid, and $1,000 in the bank. So what I tell our clients often is it's helpful to know my background because then you can understand where my guidance is coming from. And law is a variable in the decision process of a business person. It's just one variable. So that is, and then it's come to growing and scaling a business and building infrastructure and learning, making a ton of mistakes. So for anybody who's been a parent or who has been an entrepreneur, there are similar emotions that are shared. You're never going to get it all right. You're going to make mistakes. And hopefully the majority of your decisions are correct because that'll lead to your survival or your success.
That makes sense. Thank you for sharing that. and especially where you started from, and certainly where you are today, from the 30-year-old with that amount of business and that amount at the bank to where you are today. I understand, Ron, that your career began in the SEC Division of Enforcement, and then you progressed further along, and then you obviously made the choice to co-found start a law firm. So can you maybe walk us through your journey within the SEC, and then how you decided to start a law firm instead of joining another one?
Yeah, so back in the day, imagine this. I'm in my late 20s. I'm at the SEC. Well, I'm in my mid 20s actually. Loved working for the SEC, at least at that time in history, before other people got involved with the government. And it was about just doing the right thing, protecting our country, trying to get to the truth, not trying to prosecute people for the sake of prosecuting. Like I said, trying to get to the truth. The education of practicing law isn't just learning the books. It's about learning about your environment, learning about who you are, learning about your clients, having empathy. It's so many different variables. So this really added to it. So leaving the SEC at that time in history, this was 1994, was challenging. It was options if I wanted to go into litigation, which I really didn't want to. I thought that would not be ideal for my personality because I get very emotionally involved with my clients. And I didn't want to deal with the volatility that litigation often throws out. Not to say that there's no volatility with what I do. There's a ton of it, but it's just different. Went from the SEC then to Price Waterhouse, which was back in my mind far before they're hiring as many lawyers as they have now. And I went from there to a large law firm, felt it out. It had pros and cons of that experience. And then I interviewed and I had offers from a few very large law firms, many of which still exist. A small firm, I tried the small firm. And then I joined, just at a time, I sort of questioned whether I fit into the legal community. This is at 29, 30, so it was a really soul-searching experience. So I didn't like my place. It's much of what I seem to hear from people in their 20s. It's a very common experience. You don't feel appreciated. You don't feel like you're adding value. And you feel like you're at the bottom rung of the ladder. And you really don't know when or how or what will cause it to change. And so I debated on leaving the practice of law. I was speaking to people that were agents on the sports side that approached me. I was speaking to people that were recruiting lawyers. And I met with one or two small law firms. And I didn't want to leave the practice of law because intellectually I like what I did. It was a lot of the other things that surrounded that I didn't. And it felt like it was a me problem, not me and anybody my age problem. I was very myopic at the age of 29. And so I founded Sadis at 30 with Jeff Goldberg and Jack Sadis. I chose to leave my name off of the firm because people presumed I was a lot younger than I was. And then a few months later, Doug Hirsch joined because I didn't want to do litigation. Doug is now co-head of litigation, but at the time he was the head of litigation. And then it's like, okay, what do you do? I have clients. I know how to service clients. How do you get clients? How do you run an office? How do you manage costs and revenue and overhead and all the other variables that come with running a business? And we definitely made our share of mistakes of running a business. But I think all of those mistakes, having those warts, there's pros and cons to everything, right? Depends. We can't control what happens to us, but we can control how we interpret it and how we react to it. And so it afforded me a learning curve and an ability to have greater empathy with our clients because I've sat in many of their shoes at this point. Not necessarily managing money, meaning other people's money because we represent wealth managers, at least my practice area does. But knowing what it's like to start a business, knowing what it's like to have a limited budget, knowing what it's like to go home. And even if you have children, this is that redheaded orphan child that's screaming for attention that you have to tend to 7 days a week. You're smiling because you get it.
Yeah.
Being an entrepreneur, it's a blessing and a disease. Because once you do it, it's a hard thing to let go of. It's like going to war. Like I remember reading a story once about somebody on their deathbed and that the person was reliving their experience in a war, but speaking about it in a romantic nature. So these things that test us out, that we survive or we overcome, empower us. And unfortunately, as humans, at least from my perspective, I think we learn the most through conflict and failure than we do when things are good. When things are good, we tend to not really question ourselves. when things are bad or you're looking in the mirror and you're really trying to self-evaluate, that's what drives often our greatest gains or growth. Does that sort of answer the question?
Absolutely. Yeah, I was reminded of what doesn't kill you makes you stronger, essentially, as a riff off of what you were just saying. So yeah, I identify with some of the things that you shared there. So thank you for sharing that.
Oh, of
Um,
course.
uh, you've been with this firm that you co-founded for 30 years. How has your role changed since back then to today? And how is the firm different, and how are you different today versus 30 years ago when you started?
Well, I'm calmer. I have more perspective. I hope I'm more thoughtful than I was when I was 30, less arrogant. And I think arrogance really masks fear of failing. And stylistically, how I manage and how I interact has materially changed. And there's been periods where I thought being quieter within the organization was better for my colleagues, allowing them an opportunity to fill the void. And then I've learned that there's a reason that in my mind, I've been able to develop parts of what I've been working on. And my style tweaks. It changes, but it changes in, I think, more minute ways, I hope, because obviously you know, part of the role we have as a lawyer, as a partner, as a colleague, as a supervisor, as a friend to the people around me is stability. People need to know what they can expect. So that's really evolved. And then also, as I've aged, empathy. And I used to think I understood empathy. When I had conflict, I would try and spend 20, 30 seconds, 60 seconds really thinking through the other person's perspective. And what I realized later in life, that's not sufficient. And I was thinking of like Daniel Day-Lewis and the Last of the Mohicans, because I remember when that came out 1,000 years ago. I remember hearing he was a method actor and that he lived the role, at least as how I understood it. And so I'm learning, or have learned, to truly have empathy. It isn't something, for at least for me, it does not occur in 60 seconds. It requires real considerate commitment to the other perspective. And if I'm able to get into that right place of mind, I have a better opportunity, an enhanced opportunity of resolving whatever the conflict is. And also realize, and also learning, and I haven't perfected it, so this is far off, is learning to be less defensive. And I never viewed it as defensive. I just felt that I was misunderstood. But it's that saying, you have two eyes and one mouth and two ears, and use them in the ratio that they're given. So it's learning to listen better. So I think I've actually gotten quieter as I've gotten older, which I think freaks people out in certain situations. But I think really listening to one another is something that's a lost art.
That makes sense. For those who may not be familiar with what exactly your firm does, can you maybe walk us through the kind of work you do? I know you have a financial services group and a litigation group. The kind of clients you have and how you put that empathy that you mentioned so often to work when working with those clients.
Sure, that's a great question. So thanks. So our financial services practice represents people who manage other people's money, generally investment advisors, whether they're exempt from registration or not. That's the function that they serve. So we'll help register them as investment advisors. We'll draft agreements for separately managed accounts, but we're best known for setting up private funds, hedge funds, private equity funds, venture capital funds, real estate funds, commodity pools, and what other form and all iterations of that on the private fund side. We represent over 1,000 funds. We launch about 60 to 80 funds per year, but we also represent broker dealers, commodity pool operators, commodity trading advisors. We also do mergers and acquisitions, divestitures, operating agreements, shareholder agreements. We have a very active litigation practice, breach of contract, business divorces, securities law, regulatory defense. We are routinely representing clients who are at odds with the regulator on the civil side, not the criminal side. Tax, ERISA, commercial real estate are but a few of the practice areas. And what we found and what has occurred is we tend to work across our disciplines together. So it's quite, our litigation team has been quite actively involved with our financial services team. So as a result, when they have litigations, there are times they will pick our brains as well as it relates to the financial services industry. So it's been a really, it's been an interesting journey because the practice of continues to evolve. It's dynamic. It's not static. And then the consumption of legal services has also changed. The way we know the world post 2008 is today, post 2020 and COVID. These are all differentiating historical occurrences in a real short time period. And now with the advancement of AI, it's more than the trifecta. These are just the big ones.
Makes a lot of sense. So, Ron, one of the things that obviously your team does is to keep clients ideally out of litigation, but sometimes, that's unavoidable. So can you walk us sort of through your high level strategy when a regulatory inquiry or a dispute arises? How do you decide when it's time to sort of solve a problem with quiet diplomacy, being quiet, as you mentioned, versus when it's time to escalate and bring your litigation partners in?
So often at the outset of those factual circumstances somebody in the financial services side will go over to the litigation side, work with, and involve one of the partners who will give us their impression. But it's not just, I'm going to evolve the question for you. It's not just when we notice there's a litigation risk. It may also be when we're drafting certain complex agreements and we're trying to assess whether they should have an arbitration clause or a forum shopping provision, because you're not using them universally the same way. And it's very fact specific and client specific. So we will involve them in certain drafting of agreements way before we even get into that. Then when there is an issue with an investor of a client of ours who has an issue, we always loop in litigation on a call as a strategy, the regulatory defense, an inquiry by a regulator, such a broad array of facts. So we really do work more hand to glove with one another than people might expect. And it often results in what we think are great results.
That's fantastic. You mentioned macro changes that drove significant changes in the practice of law and the consumption of law, 2008, 2020, so on and so forth. In addition to those macro changes, what are some key milestones in your career that fundamentally caused, as you mentioned earlier, a stylistic shift in how you practice law yourself?
Well, think about it this way. If you really looked at how law was practiced 30 years ago to where it is today, for many people, not for all, it has evolved. So at the large law firm, at the very, very large law firm, I imagine there's probably been, on its appearance, less dramatic change than there is. But with the advent of a lot of different technology, like what we're doing from today, right? I'm in New York and you're in the Bay Area. Or at least the picture behind you is in the Bay Area.
We're in downtown SF, but yes.
I know you're in the Bay Area based on our prior conversation. We're able to do this. When we opened up an office in San Francisco, before the technology is available, we used to have this device that looked like a little monitor about this big, and you could just go device to device to speak visually with the person on the other end. Way before Zoom, way before Teams, and all the other software available, you had to go places physically more. The culture in different communities was not homogenous yet. When I first traveled 30 years ago, you could definitely sense different cultures within different communities. And I would suggest to you, like San Francisco was a closed community, Dallas was a closed community. Everybody's like, you can't do business here unless you're physically living here. I think that has changed. I think on average, people don't care where you're providing the service from. They just care a range of variables. Unfortunately, for a big subset of the marketplace, it's cost. What is cost? 2, accessibility, reputation, knowledge, and then ability to relatability. Relatability and humanization of lawyers, I think, is evolving. And I think we see fewer and fewer stodgy, what they call white shoe. I mean, we all need to be buttoned up, but it's less ivory tower because we have a lot of, if you look at who the large clients are, while some of them have stayed the same, many of them have changed. And you have the advent of the tech sector, all these different communities now, the crypto community, and there's been many, in between those two areas, or those two types of industries. So we're finding that how one communicates and how one selects legal counsel is very different than what it was. Think about how you consume goods. How many times a month do you or your family order something from Amazon?
How many times a day? Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I'm trying to be polite here.
Yeah.
Like I buy most of my material items off the internet, whether it's technology. We all rely on it these days to search and compare data. That's what's gone on with lawyers as well. Not the large clients, but it could be the emerging clients. And some of those emerging clients will become middle market, and then some of those middle market will become large. When I was earlier in my career, my focus was more, it still is focused on entrepreneurial clientele as well, but our price points and the sophistication of our practice continue to grow. And the smaller emerging entrepreneurial clients believe at times that traditional law firms are outside their price point, which is far from the truth. They view their experience as binary. I just need to get this one thing done. So I'll give you an example. You're forming a fund and in your mind, you're like, I just need to get my documents done, accept investor money, and I'm off to the races. Maybe innings 1 of a 9-inning game. It's how are you going to deal with employees? How are you going to deal with investors? How are you going to deal with counterparties? How are you going to deal with your day-to-day? Who's managing your business account? What vendors do you use? There's just so many different areas that somebody launching or starting a business really needs, in my mind, a resource to go to for guidance. And we don't all want the same hand-holding experience. That's occurred more, it's occurring with greater disconnectivity than ever before in the past. Thankfully, ChatGPT has been getting my name out, my personal name, which I found like a wonderful gift of manna from heaven, but I never had expected it. Somebody's like, yes, ChatGPT recommended me, like Sadis and Goldberg. Yeah, Sadis and Goldberg, but you specifically. So that's going to change the consumption of legal services.
That's amazing.
Let me ask you a question to
Yes.
that end. On all the people you've interviewed, is there something that you feel you're getting a uniform response as to their perception of what the greatest change in the practice of law has been?
I think what stands out, yeah, it's a great question. I think what stands out the most is the being in person versus not having to be that way. Like, not having to submit a document to a courtroom, not having to meet for depositions in person, things like that. So I think the advent of virtual meeting technologies is, while it's been out for a few years now, certainly not as shiny and new as AI is today, but it has certainly caused, at least if I reflect on prior episodes, it's certainly caused the biggest shift for a majority of attorneys that we've had on the show.
And that would probably be more lifestyle.
Yeah, absolutely. Because now they can be wherever and they can handle clients from wherever. Exactly, basically what you said. So as you were saying it, I was like, yep, another data point saying the same thing. And so I'll sort of riff a little bit here, is that in tech, because remote work has been around since before the pandemic, it feels a little it feels like that's been around for a while. But as I've spent more and more time in the legal space and with attorneys like yourself and others, I realize that there was so much historically involved physically, in terms of physically getting documents to a particular location, in terms of physically meeting some clients or opposing counsel. And so while there's clear benefits to that, it is not a requirement 100% of the time, and that opens up opportunities. Cool. I have a couple of other questions on the work that you do. So you touched upon this a little bit in terms of innings 1 of a 9-innings game is at least how some of your prospective clients think about it. What is the number one mistake that you see fund managers make in the formation or operational stage that creates the biggest avoidable litigation or regulatory risk?
And that is a great question. I would say there's not one, but at least there's several, but I'll give you 2. So first, cutting corners, where they just want somebody to draft fund documents. They don't spend any quality time drafting their agreements if they have partners, or thinking through other issues. Their response often is, I'll get to it. And when you put something off on the side, you often don't get to it. That would be 1. 2, often because of cost, which is what gets cited, not necessarily with us, just about lawyers in general. Clients' tendency to stay in communication throughout their business. So if I were in any of my clients' And I don't like, I mean, I view this as developing goodwill. Other people might view it as bad business. When I'm meeting clients for breakfast or lunch or coffee, if they're treating, I don't bill them for my time, even when they start asking me business questions. But it's really staying in touch because you don't know you may think you know, but you don't know all the important data when you're in our client's shoes. And there might be something that seems innocuous to you, but it really can have a material effect. And it's really helpful. So, like with my children, I'll give you an example. I find I learn more about my kids and really what matters when I'm just hanging out with them watching TV or they walk into the kitchen. Now my kids are older and they don't live with me, and I'll see them for a few hours here, a few hours there. There, it's a more of a forced plan discussion. So if we're only getting phone calls when you need something, that's usually there's an alarm ringing when they call and they need something. It'd be better to say, hey, this is what we're thinking of doing, this is what we're considering. In other words, bring us under the tent more routinely. In the long run, it will actually save you money. I know it sounds counterintuitive. Like those clients that worry about spending money that are trying to manage the process so tightly end up costing their organizations more. Their fear of charge results in them clamping down on sorting through information where they become the arbiter of what's relevant, what's not. And then you don't always get the information that really might have been helpful. Or they try and do things themselves. And we can tell when a client's trying to do things themselves. It doesn't conform to all the other work product. The tone of it's different. It's not as carefully drafted. And it often becomes a weak link in the problem. And you never know if you have good lawyering until things go bad. When everything's going well, how would you know? Like if you and I had a partnership agreement, we don't know how it's going until we're challenged by it.
No, that's fantastic. Taking a step back and now looking at looking at how you are as a commentator. So you're on CNBC, you're on Bloomberg, you've been quoted by the Wall Street Journal, and so clearly you have a pulse on the industry. So if you now look at where the SEC is today, what would you say is the top enforcement priority for the SEC and other regulators when it comes to private funds? And if you were at the SEC, what would be at the top of your target list?
The last question is the doozy question. Maybe, do you have a tequila I can have for that one? Okay, so it's basically back to basics. Fraud, theft, clear-cut crimes where less technical, more real material breaches of fiduciary duty. That seems to be the focus. If I were at the SEC, I would look and examine all of the rules to see which ones I thought were worthy of being on the books and maybe simplifying things. One of the challenges are, and it stifles industry, is when there are too many rules on the books, right? There's a happy balance. This is Snow White, right? This bed's too heavy. This bed's too soft. This is just the right one. Or George Carlin. It's like the 7 dirty words. You know something's offensive when you hear it or see it. So striving the balance between the laws and paternalistic protection of our citizenry, which to me that's the whole purpose of the federal securities laws, is to protect the public. And what's going on with crypto and other areas has me scratching my head as to where is the government going to end up. Society needs rules. Society needs rules they understand. Society needs rules they understand and that are enforced. So people understand there's a ramification for breaching the rules. All right, you live in the Bay Area. How the Walgreens doing around you? Like on Market Street, right? You're laughing, but people were walking in and taking goods off the shelf and not facing any prosecution.
Yeah.
You pay your taxes. You look like a good law-abiding citizen. How'd that make you feel?
Yeah, not great.
Not great. So it's the same thing with all of these laws. That's just it on a micro basis. So I think that's what I would look to do. And I would also look to expedite enforcement proceedings because they seem to take quite a while, which is also the problem in litigation from my perspective. I'm involved, unfortunately, as an investor in 1 or 2 litigations, and they drag out for years. It seems inefficient. It's very frustrating if you feel you're the one who's been harmed. So I would really look first holistically to the process and question everything. That's what I would do. And by the way, Scaramucci tried to get me to go to the White House with him. To that end, going back to the SEC a couple years back.
Okay, that's cool. Do you know him, or do you try?
Yes, I've known Anthony probably 28 years, 29 years. All of my children interned at Skybridge, and I do have the highest regard for Anthony, and he is a very loyal person, and I've seen that with people like he's worked with ever since college. So there's still good people in the world.
Glad to hear. I think that could be a separate sort of sub episode in and of itself.
Yeah, there are a lot of them.
Great. We spoke briefly about technology a few minutes ago, but I want to sort of narrow it down to technology and especially AI within the context of use within your firm by your clients and by the SEC. So can you share your thoughts around how AI is influencing not just the practice of law within your firm, how your clients are using it, and then to whatever extent you are aware that the SEC is using it? I know that's a very umbrella question, but I just wanted to throw that.
Yeah, so let's go back before the word AI was really used in a daily conversation. So when I was at the SEC, I believe it was called the Mars program, but the SEC was using software to look at trades of certain securities where they could sort the data based on where the person whose name the trades were done, where they live, area codes, so they could try and assess whether they thought there was a pre-existing relationship and people acting in concert to engage in the trading of material non-public information. As I understand I host an annual roundtable, a forum of 60 service providers in the industry. I believe the SEC is making use of similar technology today in connection with some of their assessment of conducting exams or investigations. With regard to Sadis and Goldberg, we are routinely reviewing and employing AI in assessing its capabilities. Our litigation department uses it, as I understand, more to create efficiencies for our clients in regard to sorting through data. On the corporate financial services side, I don't think it's ready for prime time, at least from what I've seen yet, to start drafting documentation that would lead to greater efficiencies. And if and when it does, it's really unclear how it will affect the industry. How will it affect junior lawyers who may no longer be needed in the number of lawyers working at a firm? To how does one consume the services of legal services? The way I connect technology right now, and everything's through comparative analysis, it's as soon as we started buying goods on the internet, our society is forever changed on how we consume any service or product. You look at reviews of people and a range of other factors in their profile. So I don't know if AI is going to, I'm hearing from everybody, which is why I question this. So if everybody's saying something, it always seems to miss the mark, that AI is going to usurp the number of people doing whatever those services are. And it seems logical that it will. But I have to imagine there's something we're not seeing. There's a blind spot where we're going to have needs in other areas. And so will it really reduce headcount forever? Maybe we're going to use more data scientists to build subsets of information within firms because we want to promote our services as being based on proprietary data. Who knows? It's like Y2K.
Yeah, it's a great analogy. I like to say that it's like for those of us who remember the GeoCities era of the internet, right? geocities.yahoo.com, maybe a third of our audience don't even know what that is, but yeah, absolutely.
Or if I went back in time and I didn't know the names of any companies that survived, but I knew the internet was going to be what it is today, you're hard pressed to pick the unicorn because even if they're the best technology, they may not be the best in their treasury and assets where somebody else can come in and undermine them at a lower cost and drive them out of business. So it's so hard to predict.
Makes a lot of sense. This has been a great conversation. Just a couple of quick questions to wrap it all up and bring it all together. You've obviously had a fascinating career and we've gone through all of those details. What is one advice that you would give to a young attorney, maybe in a position similar to where you were 30 years ago, and they're looking out and they're sort of in their late 20s, early 30s, and going through all of the emotions that you felt and we all felt at that age, and then superposed on that the landscape of AI and all of the confusing things that you just articulated right now. So what advice would you give to an attorney like that who maybe wants to look at you and say, hey, how can I get to where Ron is?
And this is the advice I give my kids and actually many young attorneys. First, look at it this way. Don't be a net taker. If you're constantly going to people and asking for guidance, you don't return anything. So eventually you're going to run out of goodwill. So one, find people, mentors that you respect, and realize that those mentors have flaws, by the way. So when you see the human flaws, you don't become disenfranchised. You realize that they are human, no different than you. Be transparent. Buy them a cup of coffee, bring them a muffin, something so that there's a quid pro quo there. And then explain to them that you love to meet with them routinely, if you're working with them. Go talk to them as much as you can and try and be obviously aware whether you're interrupting them too much, but don't be afraid. Like your whole purpose is to learn. Look, I'm in my 50s. It's still a learning day every day for me. There's a podcast I've listened to on and off. And one of the things I found interesting, I think they quoted Einstein. And the quote to Einstein was, he wasn't one of the smartest people, but he was one of the most curious people. And I think curiosity is a wonderful, great thing. I think it keeps us younger, keeps us more invested. So our whole purpose is to learn. When you're younger, that's even more of your purpose. But even when you're older, and I don't want to limit this to just young lawyers, because I've gotten asked by plenty of other lawyers that are closer to my age range that are on a different path. And they're curious about the path that I'm on. Is great. You want to pick my brain for a minute? Happy to let you do that. But wouldn't you be better served? Let's go sit down for an hour or two. Make yourself open to it. And by the way, the person in my position, if we're here to try and help educate or bring something or impart some knowledge on the person on the other side of the table, it's also a learning opportunity for us. We forget that we forget. And you laugh, but I remember when I took my children to college, I thought I remembered the college experience. But guess what? I remembered the highlight reel. I didn't remember the social anxiety of fitting in. I didn't remember the fear of being alone for the first time on my own, or trying to understand and losing my priorities. And we've all had those moments in life. If we haven't had them, then maybe we need to take a break from what we're doing, because that seems to be part of the human journey. Is it's okay to like lift your head up and be like, wait, what is it I want out of life? What do I want out of these relationships? And it behooves both sides of it. So I would tell young lawyers, unabashedly reach out to people you respect or admire. And I have people reaching out to me on LinkedIn. I think I have over 25,000 contacts. And that's how you and I met. I've become friendly with some young lawyers that I've maybe met in person or most likely have not, that reach out every couple of months. Like, it's hard to sense when you're overdoing it. So if you're returning opportunity to the person you're learning from, then you won't have to deal with that anxiety or insecurity or fear that it's not a quid pro quo relationship. And try to be appreciative of the person you're asking that of. And then maybe you afford them an opportunity to ask you questions. So it is very helpful for me to learn the mindset of a 20-something. It changes my perspective on a million different subjects. And it impacts, knowledge is power. Connecting with other people is a purpose of life. And I think, unfortunately, we live in a society where we have more connections, but we have less contact because we're overwhelmed with the connections. So it's take a moment out of your day. And when you find those persons, I'm still doing it in my 50s. There was a lawyer who I respect, who, funny enough, said Greenberg Trout. Not only because I knew his reputation through others, and I've been fortunate to lunch 2-3 times with him. He's a walking history book. The guy's awesome. Like, he worked with the Clintons and the Kennedys at the White House. It reminds me of what motivated me to be a lawyer. Money's not the motivation. If that's a motivation, it's short-lived. Money is an instrument, it's a tool. So really, what is it you hope to do? What is it you hope to learn? And it's not just about the technical skills. It's also about being a human in the environment in which we work. Because every day I'm tested, and so are you. Think about how many people drain you, how many people ask you for things, how many people are pessimistic, and we catch that negative energy. So it's, one of my roles in life is to make the world a better place. And so if I can spread love and goodwill, and I leave you with that, enables us to connect, like diversity. Everything that's going on in the world right now is horrific. I personally think we've gone back to tribalism, not to politicize this conversation. And that's a horrible thing. Because if we all work together and we embrace our differences, we can learn from one another. And that's what it's all about. The day I stop learning is the day I might as well just sit in front of the TV and never get up off the couch.
That's great. Those are profound words, and yeah, wonderful words for our audience to learn, and personally for me as well. So thank you for sharing those. Couple of quick items. So I know that you have a podcast. Can you please share what it is, its title, and what it's about?
Sure. So it's called Unfiltered Finance. I co-host it with my good friend and occasional client, John D'Agostino. It is really just to talk about money and its effect on the world and careers. And so we have some very well-known people on the podcast and some early 20, mid-20s where they're just starting out in their careers. The goal is to make it a relatable conversation about careers and how we utilize economic resources and to make sense of what's going on in the world.
Very cool. Final question for you. Is there something I should have asked you, but I didn't?
You should have asked me my mailing address. So you could send me a wonderful gift. No, it's sort of like what might help people. I think I offer it in my communications as what motivates you, because we don't all have the same drivers. So the days where I'm working with clients and I feel appreciated and I celebrate the strong connection, which I know baffles most people because they don't think of lawyers as wanting connectivity. That's when I love my job. We talk about technology, and what changed a lot of the litigators' lives is that they could do it from anywhere. Every strength probably has a matching negative. Problem is now we're plugged in 7 days a week. We're accessible. So my phone rings 7 days a week. There are certain people like I enjoy hearing from because it's a professional relationship, but I feel like I'm a part of their team. And while I feel like I'd like to be on the Academy Awards and thank some of those people. And I mentioned Anthony, who's a very public figure, has been consistently kind to me. It's not every day, and he owes me nothing. But when he thinks of me, it's nice. It's validation for caring about people on the other side. And so what motivates me is really, I know it sounds like it's fiction. It really is making the world a better place. It's about connecting with people. Like, I formed a firm because I didn't like my place, and I remember what it feels like. And so I don't want anybody else to feel the way I felt. It's very invalidating. And with it comes responsibility as well. Same thing for you. Think about the responsibility that's on your shoulders for when you're communicating, and whether it's a bigger picture or a political issue, like I just mentioned, in a very minor way. But how do you use your voice? And how do you use your voice on issues that are not to the core of what you do? So it's not clear because of all the different social media crossovers, like LinkedIn to Facebook to Insta. But I would say what motivates people. And as long as I'm paying my bills and I can see the ability to slow down someday, it's not about, and I want to maximize my income. It's not about, I'm not a paid gun in the sense of where am I going to make the most money? Let me call it a day. And it's strictly a job, because money, every time I've ever made a decision about money, and money was a primary decision, I've almost always regretted that decision. And so it's really what drives me. I just want to have a happier life. And I want to make the people around me happy. And I like to protect people. I'm very much a papa bear. Like, I'm on the more aggressive side, even though I'm like friendly and kind. And I'm always told sometimes I'm too nice. No, when I need to be aggressive, that's the job of a lawyer. I'm a protector and an advocate for my clientele. So that might have been the only open question that I would say integrate into the line of questions.
That's fantastic.
That's why everybody knows who you're talking to. Meaning not the jacket, not the hair color, not the glasses, but really the core of who I am as a human.
That's fantastic. On that note, Ron, thank you so much for your time and all of the insights you shared with us on today's episode. I really appreciate it, and I'm sure our audience will as well. So thank you.
And again, I mean this sincerely. I really enjoyed my time with you. You have a very kind, thoughtful, sincere energy. So I applaud you for that, and I want to thank you for the opportunity as well.
Pleasure. I appreciate that. Thank you.
Certainly.
The Litigator's Edge podcast requires more than a conversation. It takes action, research, and collective wisdom. If today's episode resonated with you, we'd love to hear your insights. Join the conversation and help us shape the future together. We'll be back with more stories, strategies, and real-world solutions that are making a difference for everyone. In the meantime, be sure to subscribe, rate, write a review, and share it with someone you think would benefit from it too. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you on the next episode.